one of the most powerful modern firewall features is often not used. In today's episode of Threat Talks and Deep Dives, we dive deep into identity-based firewalling and why it's so powerful. So, let's get on to it.
Welcome to Threat Talks. Let's delve deep into the dynamic world of cybersecurity.
With me today is Nicholai Piagentini. He's our technical enablement engineer here at Ontoit. Welcome.
Thank you, Rob. Happy to be here.
My name is Rob Maas, field CTO at Ontoit. And like we said, we dive deep into identity-based firewalling. And before we dive really deep in, if I was a manager or at least a non-technical person, what would be your one sentence to explain what identity-based firewall is?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, right? Identity-based firewalling, I would say my easy sentence is that it's defining security policy based on who the user is rather than where the user is.
Okay, makes sense. So you more or less answered already the first question I have here is, what is an identity? So you refer to a user. Can it also be someone or something or
Very
something
good point.
else?
There's many types of identity. There could be device-based identity. Is it a BYOD device? Is it a laptop? Is it a tablet? There could be AI agentic identity.
That's a good one.
Right? So it's an AI process that's going to do something on behalf of a user. Is it going to act as that user and have that user's identity, or does it have a unique identity
that's
that
a
represents
very good one,
as an
because
AI
we
agent?
now see the agents all act as the user.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And then it becomes no way to really understand what is being done by the user and what is being done through the automation. Yep. So perhaps we'll see those there. And then there's I know you do a lot of work with like Kubernetes, right? And there could be the idea of containers,
the
and applications.
Containers. Okay,
yeah,
makes
I think
sense.
you can be with tagging, right, within a infrastructure as a service environment.
Okay, makes sense. So we have all kinds of identity.
Yeah, all sorts of signals.
Identity-based firewall, well, in most cases will go with users.
Yes.
But they can be different things.
Yeah, certainly.
So, and you explained it a bit in your sentence, I think, but why is it so powerful?
I think the thing that makes it really powerful is twofold, right? The first thing is that when we define our security outcomes, we imagine them based on people. I need accounting to have access to the accounts payable records. Mm-hmm. And then we have to translate that to usually IP addresses or something else within policy. So being able to use the same language in security policy as we do in defining what our security requirements are is very powerful, right? Because we don't lose something in a translation. We can be more accurate. It can be more dynamic.
Yeah. So instead of saying VLAN X or subnet 10.1.2/0/24 has access to accounting software, we can just say the group accounting users has access. Okay.
We'll see often when they create that address book entry, that 10.1.2.4, they'll name it like accounting VLAN.
Oh, yeah.
But we don't really know, right? It's just, it doesn't really actually represent that.
So they name the subnet.
Yeah, but what we really want to do is say people that are in the accounting group, right? So being able to use that becomes very powerful. And then the second, I think, part that people forget is having that data in your logs, right? Understanding who generated it rather than the IP they generated it from becomes very helpful for following up on anomalies or any kind of threat hunting, right? Or anything you're doing through the SOC. It helps to know who is involved, right? It gives us an idea of what's happening there.
Yeah, so for example, if you got a firewall logs that says IP address 10.1.2.3, downloaded malware,
right?
Where are you going to run to?
Exactly. You're going to have to figure out who was there at that time,
what system, what user.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay. And how dangerous is it? Was it somebody that's, on the guest network and not important? Is it, the CEO? Who's there?
Or even maybe more user related. Someone uploaded a big file or maybe a confidential file to a foreign file share, maybe China or Russia or at least something.
What kind of things do they have access to and how dangerous is that? If you think about it, we see a lot of anomaly-based detection mechanisms being used now, especially with AI and machine learning. That is useless if I can't correlate the activities of an individual user, right? So if I don't have the user identity, it's very hard for me to build good anomaly-based triggers, right? To understand that the user is acting in a way that's different because I wouldn't know what the user was doing without that data.
So those two things. So first of all, the policies driven by the business, driven by the users and the user groups. And the second thing is the insights. So the logging, the monitoring are very powerful. Why is not everyone doing this? Because it is a really underutilized feature.
It is underutilized, which is just a shame because it is so powerful and it gives you so much information right out of the gate. I think a lot of times people assume it's going to be difficult, right? It seems like a difficult process. But the reality is It's all about finding where the data is, where the thing that maps the user to the IP or the tags or the whatever it might be, and then being able to access that. And while it might be work up front, once you put it into place, right, it tends to be low overhead. I'm sure that you've done a lot of deployments of identity-based firewalls. What are some of the problems that you've seen?
Yeah, I've seen numerous problems, all fixable. What I always did with customers is when I replaced the firewall for an identity-based firewall, I always enabled the identity-based aspect of it, the identity-based feature, so that they can at least see in the logging the results of it, so they can get confident in, hey, this is actually works and bringing me real value.
Yeah.
But for example, a problem I found is that if you use Active Directory as a source, then you log in the morning in your Active Directory environment, and if you have a desktop, so a static workplace, the IP doesn't change, and your laptop or your computer will be on for the whole day. The IP address with the username is being entered into the firewall, but the firewall has a time to live next to it. So it says, okay, after, so Rob is using this IP address for 4 hours. That's my time to live, and it starts counting down. But with Active Directory, there's no renewal of your session, unless you log in really again to Windows. So if you sit there for 8 hours, then after 4 hours, my identity is not known anymore.
Exactly.
So that's one of the problems. You need to tailor it a bit. So saying, okay, in this scenario, you can have it for 8 hours, or maybe find a different mechanism to renew that mapping.
Yes, I've often described user identity as an opportunistic hunter, right? You need to give it multiple methods are better than single methods, right? So the more you can feed it, the more accurate it'll become. Right. And that's not always the case.
That's the design part that you mentioned. You should design it up front. I won't say it's difficult.
It just requires some knowledge of it, right? And doing the work.
Okay. What about, so we are now focusing on IP addresses. Another common, I would say, misconception is terminal services, where multiple users are working on one server and therefore, in most cases, one IP address.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the idea that how can I now map them to that? And what we've seen in the industry to address that is some kind of agent on the terminal server that can map not just IP, but source port to a particular user. So I know the following range of source ports on the shared IP is a particular user. Other mechanisms I've seen is if we're mostly dealing with web-based traffic, a proxy upstream, right, would then maybe interrogate the user for identity, and now we have mapped a user identity to that session, right?
Even though it's the same IP address. It will be in the header of the request then.
And then we can put it in the header of the request,
but
right?
I can imagine that will only work for mostly
very specific web-based tools, right? And it has to be in that environment. Otherwise, you really do need to have that agent on the terminal server.
Yeah, where source port mapping will work for all network traffic, because that's just how networking works. Yeah, you initiate a session and you get allocated the source port. So if you have a specific range attached to your user,
then we can always tell exactly what's there.
Yeah, okay.
The other problem we see is with NAT, right? So we have a number of users behind a NAT. It's really impossible for an upstream device to accurately identify those users, right? Because we're no longer in a situation where we can, usually map the source IP. So that would need to be done downstream of the NAT, right? But it still allow us to do that, right? Ideally, we have firewalls in more than one location.
Yeah, and another problem might be good to add here is the use of service accounts.
Yes.
So I've seen a lot of customers using service accounts, which is a really good thing. So don't stop with that.
Yeah.
But if you log into a server, who is the identity belonging to that IP? Is it you logging in at the server or the service account running a process on that server?
Yes. And what happens when sometimes it is under the service account and other times it's under you? How do we separate those two within the IP address? And that can be very difficult.
That's a difficult one. Often we find out that the service needs to run locally. So what we say then, okay, the server is there, but we ignore the service logging into the Active Directory. So we ignore that account, and then only people who log in, often the administrators, will be mapped on in the IP address mapping.
Right, and then that, exactly that way. I think that becomes one of the more difficult kind of points, right? Is how many different accounts might be on the same system.
Yeah, or what you see more and more, sometimes there's a jump host that they use, or Bastion host, but you see also a lot of administrators working on their own machine. They have a normal account without administrative privileges, but then they do a run as if they need to do administrative tasks. And then run as an administrator.
This came up all the time when we were first doing this, right? And the policy that we came up with was we don't care which of the user's accounts they use to log in, whether they're using their administrative version of their account, right, or their kind of like a degraded version of the account. It has to do with who that person is in my organization. So we would always suggest not mapping ignoring administrator mappings, right?
So that could be
it's still the same person. It's still Bob, right? And so Bob, whether he's Bob administrator or Bob regular user, is Bob, and we write the policy around that.
Okay. Did you ever came across a customer where you were unable to implement user ID?
So never unable, just some were more work than others. And I clearly remember a customer that used Novell NetWare rather than Active Directory, and we had no tools to extract data from there. But sure enough, there was a place that had great user to IP mapping, and that was in their wireless access points, right? They used enterprise WPA, people authenticated to the wireless access point. So it actually gave us a very tightly coupled mapping between exactly where a user was at that moment with an IP address. And I thought it was actually more accurate than AD, right? Because as long as people were on the wireless access point, we knew exactly who was at each given IP address.
And the beauty of the whole solution in general is that you only need the IP address and username, and it doesn't matter where it comes from.
Absolutely.
Maybe you need to tailor it a bit, but that's all you need.
Yeah. That's the opportunistic hunter. We want to feed it from as many sources as possible and let it do disambiguation, right? Figure out which is current.
Okay. So what if you're, suppose I'm a user having a identity-based firewall, but not using any of these features?
Sure.
Should I start?
So I think what's really great about it is you can turn it on and it doesn't need to be complete day one. It doesn't need to, as long as you don't use it in policy, you won't be blocking anything. So you can incrementally enable it. So start with whatever the default setting type is. Okay, I'll point it to Active Directory and start getting that. And that gives me a chance to start seeing it in the logs and validating that it's working. And if maybe I'm seeing that, I'm having this problem where they time out after 4 hours. Well, I haven't broken anything, right? Because my policies aren't using it.
You only have gaps in your logging where the username is missing.
And you wouldn't have had any data with that before. So you're still ahead of the game, and now you can fine-tune it, right? So you could always turn it on.
Yeah.
Right? So you at least get that data in there. And that's what would be my suggestion. Turn on whatever the default basic configuration is, and at least start there.
Okay.
And then try to fine-tune it.
That sounds like an easy start. Not breaks nothing.
Yeah,
Just giving me...
times we get that right.
Yeah, exactly. And what the beauty, at least in my opinion, is also it doesn't require, for example, decryption. Because a lot of next-gen features in modern firewalls, you need decryption. And decryption, well, you can implement it, but can be really hard, especially outbound.
And it can just, it can block certain kinds of things. It can break certain kinds of applications. It is by no means easy to do.
No,
right. But you're right. This doesn't require any kind of
user ID. It's kind of like flipping the switch, and
it is.
It more or less starts working. And after that, so I have enabled it. I start with it. I see the logging. What should I do next?
So what you're going to want to do is once you start having those user identity in there, you're going to start matching them to see if things are happening as you expected, right? Am I seeing accounting users on the accounting VLAN, or do I see other users there, right? And it gives you a chance to understand whether your current policy set, purely IP-based, is actually working, right? And if it's not, that's telling you exactly where you're going to start implementing those first user-based policies.
Yeah, then you already had a problem.
Yep, exactly.
Now you're able to solve it.
Exactly.
And what I normally did with a lot of customers is when I implement this, start with smaller groups for the policies. So mainly the IT people, because I can easily explain, hey, this is a new feature, we're testing it out. Right. Come to me if it fails, and then when I'm confident that it really works, I go to the next user group, maybe HR or whatever department.
Right. And that's what's great about it, right? It can be incrementally turned on as fast or as slow as you want, for as broad or as specific as you need. And that's really makes it very low risk.
Yeah. So it's really easy to start with. The hard thing is that you need to think before, where do I have this information? Is it AD?
Exactly.
Is it your wireless access point, etc.?
Or is it both, right? Any kind of syslog.
Oh, yeah, you can override.
These are all consuming so many different things. Dynamic groups, tagging from, cloud environments. We have so many ways of getting that data in.
Yeah. Would you say it's an optional feature to enable nowadays?
It's a great question, and I would say no. This technology exists. Nearly every firewall vendor out there has some form of it now. You couldn't claim to be doing your due diligence and not at least enable it to get into the logs, right? That time has passed. In the modern world, we really expect identity to be part of our firewall policy and certainly part of our logs.
Yeah, one of the problems I see here is still a lot of people, they migrate an existing firewall to the new firewall, but then it's an as-is migration. So they take the rule set that's in there, copy it to the next one, and then they sit down for 4 years after license expires, renewals coming up, and then they start with the next migration and not looking at any of the features that these modern firewalls come with.
Because things are always in such demand. So once you've migrated it, it's very hard to take the time to go back and look at it when it's working.
Yeah.
Right. But it's important to do so, right? Otherwise, you accrue that technical debt, right? Your policy is old. It's no longer accurate. And then that's where we see problems and we see
so this is definitely one of the features that you should enable immediately, especially even if it is only for logging.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So before we wrap up, if you need to give one piece of advice for people that are now thinking, hey, I should start with this identity-based firewalling, what would that be?
I would say consider it a success as soon as you turn it on, right? It does not need to cover everything. It does not need to be absolute. You don't need perfect mapping of at every moment, every user. Just getting some of that data in there is better than your state before. Yeah. It's an immediate win. It does not need to be perfect, right? You just need to start seeing it in there. And then you'll find that you want it in there, right? Once you can start writing policy based on who the person is, it's going to save you a lot, right? I think a good example that we've discussed before is I travel for work. I need the same access whether I'm here in the Netherlands, whether I'm in an office in Plano, whether I'm in a hotel in New York. But all of those are different IPs. They might be connecting to the office through different mechanisms. I would need 3 different policies, or 4 different policies, or 5, depending on how many places I could go. But if I can write it saying, Nicholai gets this access, then that follows me wherever I go. So it cleans up the policy set. It makes it easier to follow.
What we see a lot with customers for these use cases that every user that's traveling gets the same permissions. And then at the application level, we're going to look at, hey, this is user X or user Y.
Yeah.
Instead, where we can do it already at the network level.
Yeah, and doing it at the network level is critical because it stops lateral movement and activities on target.
Yeah, it stops it immediately. It's the first, more or less the first line of defense.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, and it should be done there.
Okay, that makes sense. So then let's wrap it up. So we said it's relatively easy, but it needs a bit of work up front. Where's my data? How do I get it in there?
Low risk.
But it is no risk, low risk or even no risk, I would say.
No risk, I agree.
Because it's an immediate win. You get the logging there. Great insights in who's doing what. And then you can slowly expand from there. So if you have an identity-based firewall, then why wait? And just start today by flipping the switch, turn it on, and see what your users are actually doing. With that, Nicholai, I would like to thank you. So
thank you. It was a pleasure.
Great insight. Thank you. And to you listeners, enable user ID. And I hope to see you next time. If you like what you just heard, just press like and subscribe, and I hope to see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Threat Talks, a podcast by On2It Cybersecurity and AMS-IX. Did you like what you heard? Do you want to learn more? Follow Threat Talks to stay up to date on the topic of cybersecurity.